Welcome, everyone. I'm here today with the Kiloby Center for Recovery. I'm Lynn Fraser, and I'm interviewing Antonia Montoya. I'm going to let her introduce herself in more detail in terms of what it is she does. She has a great gratitude site. She works a lot with gratitude. She has a personal story of recovery that I know you're going to be interested in. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Great. Thank you so much, Hi, Lynn. Thank you for having me. And yes, I'd be happy to introduce myself. I'm Antonia Montoya. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where I'm from, which I feel is, no matter what, is just such a part of me and part of my story. So I like to say where I'm from. I have a long history here with my family for centuries. So it's a big part of me. And the work that I do, I'm actually a health educator, and the way that shows up in my work and in my world is through coaching and doing workshops and trainings and things like that. And specifically, my work revolves a lot around gratitude, as you mentioned. And I do some work related to our Gratitude Collective is the gratitude website that you mentioned. Thank you. And it's all about gratitude sharing, and it's a beautiful place to be in times when things are hard or not so hard, just as a daily practice. And then the work I do around sobriety and recovery and gratitude is thrivingthroughsobriety.com. And really, I feel like they cross over so much. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more as we go. But that's my short and sweet intro. And as far as a lot of times people ask about the initials behind my name. I have a Master's of Science, so that's the MS. That's pretty common. And the other one is CHES, which is CHES, and that's Certified Health Education Specialist.
Oh, I see. Okay. And what is the training for that? Is that a university or a special?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a university. I have a master's in health education. And then from that, you can get this national certification if you test and maintain your CEUs and things like that.
Oh, I see. So as a health educator, do you specialize in addiction, or do you work with a lot of different areas with people?
I'm kind of compartmentalized in some ways. And like I said, they cross over. My schooling, I didn't specialize in any one topic or modality. What I did is, because I was already working in the field, and at the time I was working in HIV prevention, and that crossed over sex education, drug, there was a lot of active and prior drug users and things like that. So like that was a complex area to be working in. And so I came into schooling really interested in the process of behavior change. So that's what I specialized in my work, in my schooling, and even since then. I really feel like that's what excites me, is like what gets people to change behavior. And you would assume that would be very individual, but it's also environmental and all sorts of things. That's my jam.
That's something really fascinates me too. Yeah. How is it that we actually get to the point where we change in a fundamental kind of deep way?
Right.
So what are your I know this is kind of a big question, but what would you say about that? What are your top kind of fundamentals of behavior change?
Yeah. So I do a lot of work around, or I utilize motivational interviewing, and I really get motivational interviewing because what it does, it's kind of a crossover of a few different things that I think are fundamental for behavior change. And one of those is self-efficacy, like believing that you could actually do that. Another piece is, and which is tied into self-efficacy, is this idea of kind of like doing an inventory of our strengths and past successes and things like that to draw on. Because one thing I've seen, even before I went through my own recovery, back to when I was first, working in the HIV field, one of the things I saw always with people that were, especially active drug users, is this like self-shaming, like this focus on like, I did it again, or relapse, or whatever it is, whatever the behavior is that they're struggling with, and like, I'm a terrible person type of. That's how I see like that self-shaming. And so what I like about motivational interviewing is it does work to help us switch our focus to noticing why, like, not only why we want to change, because that's another piece, tapping into our internal motivation, but also doing a lot of work around noticing the things that we do well and that we're proud of, and that we can, just our strengths and our skills and all these things that it is going to take to have success in recovery. And so I think it's a lot about switching mindset. And, at the same time, I do look at like environmental factors, because how can we not, I think we can get, I hope we can talk a little bit more about this, but I'll mention it right now. Even in my gratitude work and in this work and in everything that I do, I really strive to not put too much on like personal responsibility, because although I kind of believe in that and love it in some ways, the reality is that certain people, certain races, certain ethnicities, certain, you can look at all the like intersectionality of like disability and poverty and all these different things come into play. And it's not only about like getting your mind on board. Right. A lot of times it's very complex. So while I do work around helping people see possibilities and change their mindset, I know that's within a context of intense pressures in every which way, and a lot of disadvantages that people are facing. So
in the late 80s and early 90s, I worked for an AIDS organization. And what you're talking about, I can just see so clearly what was happening there. You have such shame and stigma around being gay to start with.
Right.
The culture of gay men, especially at that time, was primarily based on clubs and drinking and drugs. And it was very difficult to find your people if you couldn't go to those places. And that was, a really big part of it. It started to, there was obviously exceptions to that, but that was a big part of it. And then
I can't help but interject right now, is that even today, even like I'm bisexual, and even today for me, sobriety, that was one of my hard things in my own recovery story.
Okay.
It's such a part of the culture. Like, I know that's not what you're talking about now, but I just wanted to like interject that in case any of the listeners are living this. It's such a part of the culture in the gay community. It does revolve around alcohol a lot, and still to this day. But anyways.
No, that is what I was speaking to, and I'm not happy to hear that it's actually pretty much the same. Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's not only that. I think the change that's happened since the 80s, I mean, I don't know, because I wasn't out in the 80s, and I was pretty young at that point, but from what I know, I think the biggest change that's happened is that there are more resources to connect with other, queer people, that without being in the, in a club scene.
Right.
But it's pretty limited. I live in Albuquerque. It's limited here. So I can't speak to like bigger cities. It's pretty limited. And so while there might be things like that, and there's social media, and there's not even just social media in the broad sense, but like, ways to connect with people in other areas and things like that, just from the comfort of your own home, that,
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah. Yeah. And the kind of the difficult part of it too is that there's so much shaming. The culture around queer people has changed a lot
Mhm.
since Ellen. It was kind of the marker of when a lot of that change really happened. But the AIDS movement too really changed a lot of people on that. But you have the shame and the stigma and the feeling like you're outside of the norm, you're outside of society, you're outside of that protection. People are actively persecuting you. And then a lot of times people will use some kind of addictive substance to deal with those feelings, which makes
Right.
it worse. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about shame and stigma and let's go further into what you were just talking about with the environmental
Okay.
factors.
Well, I just I want to interject. So like, I want to start talking a little bit about gratitude in that, because I think that's the surprising thing for people, is that a lot of times when people think about practicing gratitude, or they witness other people's gratitude sharing, a lot of times people feel like it's an erasing of reality, or erasing like a I don't know, I don't, the word's not coming to me, but it's like a blurring this hard reality and just kind of like living in a bubble and only choosing to see certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and I feel like when I'm saying certain things, it's like I'm talking about a lot of things, and that's where this like uh stigma can come in, and also like prejudices, and institutional and systemic racism, and all sorts of different things, I think, are part of these like things that people see as being diminished or blurred or erased by choosing to practice gratitude. And I actually see it a different way. And I actually see a gratitude practice as a way to get out of like being stuck in shame, being stuck in self-judgment and judging others, and all sorts of different things. So I see gratitude as a tool or vehicle to move through these like hard spaces while still seeing them with eyes wide open. And that's a big piece of my gratitude. Like I always talk about gratitude being 3 steps, and the first is noticing, because you can't be grateful for something that you're not aware of, that you're not noticing.
Sure.
So there's
Yeah.
a mindfulness component there,
Mm-hmm.
and then appreciating. And then the third one is sharing, which isn't what everyone does, but that's what I encourage, because I think it helps spread that way. Um, so the noticing thing is so vital, because that's that first step in gratitude, but it's also the first step to dealing with social justice issues and other things like that as well. Because if we aren't, so I really see them as tied in, not like ignoring the negative and only focusing on the positive, but noticing the world as it is, and still noticing or recognizing our ability to find um, gratitude, even though, or in those systems, and all of that sort of thing. And to go back to like the idea of like of shame, well, I think what's interesting about shame, and I'm not an expert in shame, but but I've had my practice um, on both sides. What's interesting about shame is it's a generalization. You take something like I like Brene Brown's work a lot with this, how she talks about how we take like one event that happened, and it may have been something that we regret, that we wish it was against our values. Like if I did something that was not aligned with my values, and it's not, you know, whatever. So it's like, it's something I regret. It's something that I wouldn't want to like advertise as like, this is who I am. But what we do in our minds is that we say, this is who I am. Like, I messed up in this way. And it wasn't just like I messed up. It's, I'm a bad person. This is who I am. And so the very thing that we don't want people to do, we end up doing it, with our, in our own minds. And I feel that because it's a generalization, that's why I feel like gratitude can be helpful in these cases, because what it can do, and specifically the way that I like to encourage people to practice gratitude, which is being very specific and detailed in their gratitude, it helps us break free of these broad generalizations, and get to some very specifics. So while we might not be happy about or proud of something that we did, we also can look at maybe the lesson learned from that. What does that mean? So like, one of the big things that I like to do to get through something difficult or challenging in this way is, so like, if somebody does something and they come from a place of shame, self-shame, then they're generalizing, right? And you know how I said earlier, we usually in those cases, we did something that was not aligned with our values. So what I do is try to look there. What are you grateful for about your values? What is it about that connection of those values and the way that that those help you create, like almost finding like gratitude for that being the roadmap, so that you even know that you're off course. Because if you weren't aligned, if you had no concept of your values, you'd have no idea that this was off course. And so I like to break past this shame cycle by getting really specific and clear and looking at, values, and looking at all sorts of these sorts of things that people can connect with, and that is there for like energizing, because they're like, oh yeah, I do believe this, and I do show this. It's not just talk. Like, I have these, I could ask a question like something about like, when's the last time that you remember, acting on those values, something that was aligned with those values, basically, and helping people realize that, oh, this isn't like 30 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Like, this is on a weekly basis. This one thing that you did was an exception to the rule, and that's why it's the sore thumb. That's why it's so big and feels, it's getting all the attention. And so I guess I kind of like went off a little bit, but I do feel that that gratitude can be a tool to help us navigate these type of tools. And one last thing I want to say that's a little bit that I couldn't help but think about when you asked the question was, these days, a lot of people are saying that other people are shaming them for doing things wrong. Like, and one of the ways that I think about that is like people calling out racism and things like that. And although I'm not trying to dismiss these feelings of shame, I think that what can happen is that we get so, like, if somebody is saying like, oh, you're shaming me, it can immediately create a closing, like, nope, I'm not gonna talk about this because of how I'm feeling. And I think that that's a stuckness that I think we can say, we can take some distance and feel what we need to feel, and also say the same practice. Whether we are self-shaming or somebody is telling us that we're doing something wrong, we could say, what are we grateful to learn in this situation? What are we noticing that's alive in this other person? And then also, how do like, part of the reason I think people have this like white fragility or other defensiveness that comes up is, again, because it's not aligned with their values. They're being presented with something that it's like, oh no, I think that, I respect all people, and they
Right.
don't realize that they're part of these systems of racism, and it's hard. And so again, I think that like we can find gratitude for those values that a lot of times everyone can agree on. So anyways, that's just a little side thing about being kind of on the other side of shame.
Right. So I want to go a little bit further into forgiveness. So a lot of times people might think they can't feel gratitude because they can't forgive themselves for something, or maybe they can't forgive someone else for something. And it really does color their whole perception of that. How would you work with that?
Forgiveness is such a tricky one. I used to think, and I always reserve the right to change my mind. I might think that again in the future. I used to think that forgiveness was key in getting past things, and I don't anymore. I think that if we can get to forgiveness, that's great. But I think it can be such like a mountain to climb for people, that if we wait for that, it's like it's putting too much pressure, in my opinion, right now, where I'm at with forgiveness right now. Um, but I think that we can, again, back to the idea of like using gratitude as a tool, I think we can find gratitude for something without forgiveness as well. And that's what's helped me kind of get to where I am with this, as it's like gratitude can help you on the journey to forgiveness. Gratitude can be one of the tools to get you there, and it can also help you move forward even if you don't go that full way and work through forgiveness. So I think one of the big things, like, I love how you brought this up right after talking about shame, and this is probably why you did, is like when we're talking about self shame, that can keep us stuck. And sometimes it takes, forgiving ourselves or letting ourselves off the hook to move forward. And I do think that is really important. But even if you're not really there yet with actually forgiving and using that word, there's things you can do to still move forward and work on letting go of that. Um, and one of the things that is, I think, is very important is to acknowledge, like, just, I think one of the biggest things is to just notice again and acknowledge that that's there. And yeah, if you can get to forgiveness, that's beautiful and that's great. But I wouldn't make that so foundational to any other, changes or growth or transformation or anything like that. Because sometimes, like, even in my own personal story, I had um, well, I guess I'm just going to say it because I'm feeling called to say it. I was sexually assaulted many years ago. And right away, I was like, um, trying to get to forgiveness of this person. And I pretended that I did. I mean, I didn't know that at the time. I really thought that I did. Um, Not like making it that it was okay to happen, but like forgiveness in some sort of way. And a lot of that for me was tied into when I told some people about it. A lot of people were wanting to hurt this person, and I was like, I really didn't want that cycle of violence to continue, and so I thought that was forgiveness. Interestingly enough, this sexual assault for me was um, part of my drinking story and my my story with on a long path. Like it wasn't even on my radar to stop drinking at that point, but that was part of it. And what's interesting is that it wasn't until I'm, more than 4 years now into my recovery, and I'm just like, I don't know, about 8 months ago, I started to unpack a little bit more about this incident, or this trauma that I suffered, and realizing that I wasn't at forgiveness then, that I really wasn't, but I was, and I don't really feel like, maybe I'm still not, but in a way it doesn't matter, because what and there was a forgive myself component, because I had drank and had passed out, and that's when this had happened. And so a lot of it, so while some of it was like forgiving him, it took me a long time to forgive myself about that. And then I think that even in my early being like 2 years, like in early recovery, I was still like focusing on that as like, this is the reason why I need to be sober now, even though this was 10 years ago. And part of that was still me not forgiving myself. And I didn't realize, that's what I'm saying, part of like this layers of the onion that has happened is like in the last, 6 to 8 months or something like that, realizing these like extra dynamics or pieces of this that I didn't realize, that I don't really feel like I moved past it and I grew from it, but I don't know if I really don't think I ever really worked through any sort of forgiveness of him, even though I thought I had. And although I definitely worked through, I guess maybe now I've forgiven myself, because it's not like this big piece of my even like sobriety story anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so there was something about that like level of letting go that finally allowed me to be like, yeah. But I did work early on in realizing that I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Like, and that was part of self-forgiveness. But again, it was like, that was one part of this mountain I had to climb. It wasn't the full thing. So yeah, so forgiveness is bigger than you realize when you're doing it.
It definitely is. And what I also find is a lot of people have a lot of compassion for other people and other people's circumstances. And, if that had happened to somebody else, they might be more compassionate than they would be towards themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate that we're so hard on ourselves.
Definitely.
Maybe you could get into your own recovery story a little bit too. How did gratitude play into that? Was that something you were working with at the time? Is that something that developed later?
I was already doing my gratitude practice, and that actually helped me. Part of my my drug of choice was vodka.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just such a part of my life. And in so many ways, as this sort of thing happens, as this is in recovery for people, to look at all the ways that our lives kind of revolve around this. But another piece of my story that I don't think I mentioned to you when we spoke before, Lynn, is codependency. And in a lot of ways, like fast forwarding to like actually being in recovery, it was challenging for me to stop drinking, but the line is so clear. It's like drink or not drink. Like, so I know when I know if I, relapsed or something, it seems really clear to me. Whereas with codependency, the line is so wide and fuzzy, and I don't realize it until I'm like way past it, and then feeling some sort of way, and then realize, oh my goodness, I'm in it, I'm at it again. And the reason I bring this up is that my codependency kept me from looking at my own drinking behavior for so many years. And I think that this is a common, actually, I'm sure some of you that are listening right now are not in recovery yourself. I bet you're listening for somebody else that you're wanting to help. And I was that. I was like reading the books for other people, because I always surrounded myself with people that had addiction issues, people that were way worse drinkers than I was. And that helped, and that combined with having this like codependency focus, which for people that don't know, and I'm not an expert really in it, but it's just this idea of, this is my simple definition, I guess, is it's this idea of focusing outward and looking at other people, and your focus being on other people's actions and everything, and it serves you. You get something from helping others, or doing for others, or being a savior of others, or even just focusing on their drama so you don't have to deal with yours. Like, it comes up in different ways. And so for many years, I was like obsessed with like partners, partners drinking, friends drinking, like things like that, other people's drinking specifically, and other drug use. And I think that what it did was that it kind of blinded me from my own, like, my drinking never seemed as bad as, I don't want to name people, but as so-and-so or this person. And so because I was so outward focused, what I would do is like, oh, since I'm not as bad as they are, I'm going to like help them. And so, so that was like part of my recovery story a lot, because it really took me really addressing my codependency issues to finally start to look at like, what is my issue here, And part of one of like the little precursors to recovery, I feel like, I don't know, there's like stepping stones to recovery, you're like, you get closer and closer to the point where you finally just stop. And one of those for me was, I was at the library, and I had a partner at the time who was an alcoholic. I'm sure she's still an alcoholic. We're just not together anymore. I don't want to talk about her, but I was in the library looking through drinks on alcoholism. Looking through books on alcoholism and drinking to try to help her. And I was like, just in the library flipping through books to try to figure out which was the best one. And I came across this thing that said, I forget the exact wording, and I wish I've tried to figure out which book this was, and I can't figure it out. But anyways, it was just this thing that I needed at that moment, so I don't need to seek it out now. But basically, it was this line in this book, and the author said, if you have to control your drinking, you're an alcoholic. And I was like, I literally laughed. Like, I went, I closed the book and put it away. But it stuck with me because that was the way that this story I told, that I wasn't as bad of a drinker or something like that, was that I could control it. So I could, I would put these like restrictions in place for myself and I didn't always, because, because we know how those things happen. But but on a day-to-day basis, I did. And a lot of people didn't even realize that I drank as much as I did. And a lot of people didn't realize how much I suffered from drinking, like with how much of it would take over my life after I drank and things like that, with terrible hangovers and being sick and all sorts of things like that. And part of that was because I spent an enormous amount of mental energy controlling all of those factors. And that's another piece of codependency, is those elements of control or feeling like you have control. And so that was like a piece, that was like, again, one of those little stepping stones that just stuck with me. But the other thing that happened is, like I said before, I was practicing gratitude all through this time. And what I do this really cool year-end gratitude reflection. So like in January or at the end of December, I look back, I have these different questions, and I could share them with people. I think I actually have it on thrivingthroughsobriety.com. So you could
I'll put the link on it.
Yeah, you can access that there. I do this end of year reflection, which really you could do anytime. It doesn't have to be January, but I have, I don't know, like 12 gratitude questions. And one of the questions is, what was something this year that you were not grateful for? And then kind of like unpacking that, like, what was that about? What did you learn? Like, what is in there? What is so, and then back to the values. What is so important to you that was not in alignment?
Right.
And that is how I really stopped drinking. Because when I did that gratitude reflection, the one I had really clearly, like, it was in November, had this time when I completely overdid it, let people down, was sick for like 2 days. Like, it was just like a bad scene. I was like more sick than I think I've ever been. And let my mom down, let other people down. Like, I couldn't show up for work. It was not good. And so a month later, when I'm doing my gratitude, or almost 2 months later, when I was doing my gratitude reflection, that stuck out as this, like, I wasn't grateful. Like, I was able to find some gratitude for, like, you know, having a toilet to puke in or something, but I wasn't grateful for the root of it. And that is what was like, so it's still, I didn't stop until April, and this was in December, but that was really the clincher, that gratitude question. And really it was like a non-gratitude question. And since then, like, after I stopped drinking, gratitude has been so helpful. And of course, so many recovery centers, you know, in the 12 steps, it's not like one of the actual steps, but so many sponsors advise people to practice gratitude. So many people practice gratitude on the journey of recovery. And it definitely helped me as well. What's nice is that I already had it as an established practice going in, so that really helped. But yeah, so that's a little bit about my story, and some of that, you know, these stories are so long. But one of the, like, interesting things about that particular story is that because I had already done so much self-growth and transformation before I even started my recovery, I think that's why I didn't have such a bottom out type of recovery story. I didn't stop drinking. Like, I had, and I know people have different ways of seeing this, and they say your bottom is wherever you were at before you stop. But I had such lows, like the sexual assault I mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly.
And other things like that really, if I was kept waiting for a low or a bottom, what would happen is that I would always look to, like, oh, well, it's not as bad as that. It's not bad as it once was, so I'm better now. And
Mm-hmm.
it really, so I don't really like the idea of like a bottom, because I had a shallow one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to me and it was, so that through that gratitude, or through that, and really, whether it's gratitude or anything else, it was really just an idea of personal reflection, of just really looking at this thing that stood out and wasn't aligned with everything else that was what I wanted my life to be, or what I thought my life was, and that sort of thing. And so that was really key.
So one of the things that stands out is that when we can't really handle being present with our own internal environment, we'll always find ways to get away from it.
Mm.
And managing someone else's addiction is certainly an attractive way to do that.
Yes.
So somebody who might be either new to recovery or wanting to go in, or maybe someone who's been in recovery for a while but feels like they could go more deeply into recovery, what would be some suggestions for people?
Well, obviously I'm really big on this gratitude thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Maybe
really agree
maybe
with,
you could say exactly how to do it, like
yeah.
some ideas about how to do that.
Yeah, that's great. So I really love this idea of this being such a tool in gratitude. I mean, in recovery. But I think what happens for people, I've seen this with people that I've worked with, is that there's a couple things. One, I think for some people, gratitude as a practice is seen as like uncool. And we're already like, God, they're like, gosh, who am I? Like, I used to be like this whatever, you know, like whatever like image or ego that we have around like our using behavior. And then and then now I'm practicing gratitude, like, you know, like, so I think for some people it's seen as uncool. I think for other people, or even maybe even those same people that are maybe putting a shield up, it's seen as like, as fake. Like, and I think maybe that's why it's not, or that's why they think it's not cool or something. It's like seen as very like, um, I don't know, just like I kind of talked about this already, but it just seen as something that like isn't like the real powerful thing that motivates us, or that, you know. Another thing, I'm a musician, and I know that it's easier, and I'm a writer, and it's easier for me to write from the place of like grief and loss and longing and all these things that don't feel like gratitude. And so I kind of get that idea of like, there's almost like an edge and a well of like emotion and inspiration that I think can come from the dark, murky stuff. And and that's all just perception stuff that I've been talking about. And I think there's also people that are like, okay, I want to practice gratitude, but I don't feel grateful. So how do I keep from being fake? If you're saying it's not fake, Antonia, how do I keep from being fake if I'm not feeling grateful? Then what? And so all of this, I think, like the first part, I think, is just like the advice I'd have for that, for like the first realm of like more people getting on board with the idea of even practicing gratitude, is to find people, like, gratitude is real and it is authentic and genuine. And so if what you're seeing, like maybe you're seeing somebody's gratitude sharing and that's where you're like, ew, that is not real, then find somebody else that you're more inspired by. Find different voices. Maybe somebody that's more like you. Maybe somebody that's not like you at all, but is just like an exciting, different type of voice. So notice that. And I do think it's important, obviously, since I have our gratitude collective and it's all built on gratitude sharing, I do think it's important to read other people's gratitude because it inspires in this very natural, beautiful way. Because what happens is, like, somebody will say that they're grateful for something, and then you realize, oh, I'm grateful for that too, or something like that. And then you hadn't even been thinking about that, but then you're inspired by what they wrote. So find voices that are cool to you if you're wanting it to be a cool practice. And you might even, like, look at quotes from people who you admire and who you look up to, because that's one of the things I found now that I've been doing this, like, gratitude work for a while, and part of that is gratitude writing, and I like to include quotes. I'm always really shocked by who shows up with gratitude quotes. So, like, Nietzsche, who's like, Nietzsche has a couple of gratitude quotes.
Oh,
and
that's
they're
pretty
real
cool.
quote. They're real, because, you know, some quotes are fake online, but
Yeah,
they're real. And so, like, you might be like this, like, you know, whatever, whoever you are, like, find the voice that touches you and use that as some inspiration. The other thing that I would suggest is that maybe the word gratitude is the wrong word for you. And this is what I do when I lead workshops with young people, is that I don't even start, like, I mention gratitude to start, and then I pull out a chalkboard or dry erase is what they have in classes these days and things like that. And I ask the kids, what words do you have as alternatives for gratitude? And
oh,
sometimes slang comes up.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes, you know, like, anything. And one example I have of this is that somebody came to one of my gratitude workshops, and he said, I love this idea of gratitude, but I hate the word gratitude because when I was brought up, my mom always used the phrase, you should be grateful. And so the word grateful, he would never, like, it, like, made him cringe.
Right.
Because it was built in with so much judgment. You should
Yeah,
be
you should be.
grateful.
Yeah. What
You're
are
not.
some of the words? What are some of the
Oh,
words people come up with?
I mean, all over the place. Like, one of the ones that I was surprised by when I heard it and I love was moved by. Like, I'm moved by
Oh,
this and that. You know, appreciation is, like, an easy one. Like, that, you know, and honestly, when I say gratitude, like, when I express gratitude to an actual person, I tend to use appreciate. Like, I really appreciate that. I don't tend to say, like, I'm really grateful for that. Although when I write my gratitude, I always say grateful. That's an interesting self-reflection.
mm-hmm.
But other words, you know, like blessed is a big one that can come up for people. I did this talk with some young people not that long ago, and they said lit, like, the that was lit, you know, just a slang type of word.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I love about this idea is that it creates more ownership, and it's the same concept. I don't care what word you use. The point is, and for me to kind of go into, like, the what or the how of this, is that I'm really big on a written gratitude practice where you write down, and I say 3 things a day. Some people say 5 things each day that they're grateful for. You could do however many you want. What if you just do 1 a day? That's fine. Like, it's okay. Anything works. I like, personally, I talk about writing down 3 things each day that you're grateful for. And this is different from, like, telling somebody thank you. Because it's put out there to, like, you might think of it as, like, appreciation for, like, the universe or a higher power or whatever. But even if you don't have anything of that, it's just more like, I noticed this thing and I appreciate it. And that goes on your list.
And
And
then
so,
your brain notices. So then you begin to develop the neuroplasticity, the brain, the neural networks for that.
yes.
Yeah.
And this is one of the cool things. So for me personally, I do mine at night before bed.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that I go through my days noticing, like saying like, oh, I want to include this on my gratitude tonight, and this, and this, and this, and this, and it's way more than 3. And then whenever I do my gratitude that night, I forget all about that stuff because it's whatever's alive for me in that moment a lot of times.
Yeah.
Sometimes those things end up in my gratitude, but a lot of times they don't. And so it changes your mind about the possibility that there is gratitude to be found in your day-to-day life. And
Yeah.
so I really am big on it. And so yeah, for those, like, making it your own, I think, is really important. And as far as any actual tips, I definitely am a big proponent of the daily practice, because otherwise we tend to only write down gratitude when things are like really, like when it's really obvious and really like, oh yeah, I'm having such a good day, of course I'm grateful. But there's a lot of power in that, like, after you've been really anxious or angry or irritable or even just bored. That happens to me because, I've been doing this for a long time. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I feel like bored with gratitude.
Yeah.
And so then I'll mix it up and use different words or take pictures of things I'm grateful for versus writing. Or, I can mix it up here and there. But there's a lot of power in the daily. And I am really big on writing down details, because I find the more details, the more true it is. If I just said something like, I'm grateful for my mom, I am grateful for my mom, but there's times I'm not like feeling grateful for my mom, or in whatever situation. Maybe I'm like, we had an argument, or we're on each other's nerves or something. So the more I can be really specific, like, I am grateful to hear my mom's voice last night on the phone. Like, so the more details you can give, the more true it is. And that truth goes back to it being authentic, not being fake, not in getting to something that's real for you. So those are a couple of my tips. And I have more on the website and things like that. Because I do think everyone can be grateful. And I've yet to find, when I do workshops, and workshops imply that people chose to be there, and that's not always true. I've done some talks at like businesses where they like had people like during a staff meeting.
Yeah.
And so and kids being kind of forced to go and things like that. I've yet to find somebody that couldn't write down something that they were grateful for. And so everyone can do it, but I think that there's some tips and tricks and things to help make it more aligned, more real, more powerful, and a little bit easier.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's one thing about someone who's done a lot of practice, is that they've probably seen a lot of the obstacles and have lots of great ideas about how to work with them. What's the website address that people could find out more about your work?
So there's two. There's one that's thrivingthroughsobriety.com. And that's the one that's very obviously focused on recovery. Our Gratitude Collective, and that's OUR, ourgratitudecollective.com, it's like a social media site for gratitude sharing. And there are groups. So like, there's subgroups, and I think there is a group around sobriety and recovery. So people can be in the rooms, so to speak, with other people that they're connected with. There's also a group that's like, I'm not really feeling it today, but I'm here anyways, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure.
So that one is more open. It doesn't have to just be people that are in recovery, but it's, what's nice about that is that that's where you can actually see other people's gratitude sharing. I post there every day. We have a few other people that are like every single day, and then we have other people that come here and there to share. And one thing that's nice about that website is that you can change the privacy of each post. So by default, it's only seen by other people who are members, who are logged in. But you could change it to public if you wanted to like share it on social media, like another social media like Facebook or Twitter or something like that. Or you could change it to private, so it's almost like your own gratitude journal that only you see. And I can't even see those, even as the like behind the scenes moderator. I can't see any of those private ones, so it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody was feeling like gratitude was a big reach, it would be really helpful to read through some of those,
Yeah,
either their own or from somebody else.
yeah. And I have like a one level up. It's only, I mean, because the website's free, but for just like the $5 a month level, like one tiny little step up, I send a weekly writing and quotes and prompts to help people that, you know, if it is feeling like a little bit of a reach, I think that that is really helpful, because the writing helps you see things in a different way. And then the prompts are really great because it's like a specific gratitude question. And
Right.
that I think is really helpful, because if you're like, yeah, I'm great. And that's where when I said I've yet to find somebody that can't find something they're grateful for, it's always through gratitude questions. It's important to ask a good question.
Right.
And they don't always have to be so big. People make it really big. Like a lot of times I'm like, what's something you saw online today that you're grateful you saw online? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
really not that big. Like it's
Right. Right. Yeah.
it's not like these big life-changing like aha moments of gratitude. It's like
I had
little,
a baby today.
what was that?
I had a baby today. I'm grateful I had a baby
Right.
today. It doesn't have to be that big. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah.
So I'm just kind of interested in how this works with motivational interviewing.
Mm.
Do you do, do you ask those kinds of questions, or yeah, why don't you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So motivational interviewing is something I use as a, so motivational interviewing is interesting. It's a very specific process, and the whole point of it is to help people resolve ambivalence. That's like the whole end game of motivational interviewing, getting off the fence. Like, I want to do this, but I also want to do that, or I want to do this, but I keep doing that. Um, Motivational interviewing is to help resolve that ambivalence. It's a very specific process to help you there, but it's built on these things that aren't that can be plucked out of that process, like compassion, like seeing strengths in people, like asking really good questions, desirable questions that people want to answer, and that they're like that help them like tap into their motivation to change, and even um, looking at what they love so much about staying the way, not changing, like so looking at both sides of the fence and finding you know what there is to find in both areas. So as the actual process of helping people resolve ambivalence, I only use that in coaching, which I do one-on-one coaching, whether it's related to gratitude or any, you know, my coaching is more broad in helping people make behavior changes. So it's not only related to gratitude. So I use that as a coaching tool when people are wanting to make a change and not. So really it could be used for somebody that's like on the fence about practicing gratitude, you know, but a lot of times it's people are usually presenting with things, you know, like wanting to, you know, stop addictive behaviors is like a really big one, or wanting to, you know, make a change, any other, like wanting to start exercising again, like any sort of behavior change or something like that is usually how people present with it for coaching. So I use motivational interviewing in coaching. Now, I will use gratitude as one of those questions. A lot of times I use gratitude to help people when they're in those self-shaming cycles. I use two questions that I always use in my coaching when people are kind of beating themselves up. And that is, one thing you've done this week that you're proud of. And the other is, one thing that you're grateful for, or what are you grateful for? And sometimes I'll do a more poignant gratitude question for the person. instead of just the overarching, what's one thing you're grateful for? I might ask them a very specific one that fits with their, I'm coaching them, so I know them a little bit more. So I use those questions as coaching questions within the frame of motivational interviewing. But I also use pieces of motivational interviewing in all sorts of work that I put out into the world with, posts on Facebook. I have a Thriving Through Sobriety is also a page on Facebook, and I'll post things that are kind of like motivational interviewing questions or even philosophies, but I don't label it that way. And it's really not helping somebody reduce or resolve their ambivalence, because that's such a process. It's just, these like pieces of it. And I really believe in motivational interviewing. I think it's really important, especially because at the end, once somebody has resolved their ambivalence, or even just not at the end, like, it's so honoring every step of the way, because it's not, I think when we want to help people, just maybe even as lay people, as like, whether it's personal, like wanting to help, I really want to help my mom. So really, whether you have somebody like in your life that's like, they need to make a behavior change. Maybe their doctor told them like they need to start exercising more or eating better because they're diabetic or something like that. Then what happens is that they can be so whether it's personal, like just helping out a friend or somebody, or whether it's like you're a coach or you're somebody that does this for a living, or whether you're a therapist, because that's where motivational interviewing came from. Mm-hmm. The research was first done with therapy and with substance abuse. At any level, you can do these like this sort of work, and it's really, really important, because, like, to go back to my point, is that it's our tendency to help people might be like, you've got to do this, like this panicky, like you could die, or you could, whatever, like
that's never received as very helpful.
It's never helpful, no. Or like giving people pamphlets, or like doing research for people, or you should read this book, or you should whatever. Mm-hmm. What I love about motivational interviewing is that it's honoring the person's own knowledge and motivation to change. They already know. I mean, unless they absolutely don't know about something.
Right.
After you've moved from that point, like, they actually know this, like, what, I know that's kind of confusing to talk about, so I won't go into it further, but most of the time, I'll just say it that way, most of the time people know what they have to be doing. They're right. Just not there yet. And so what we can do, and what motivational interviewing does, is it honors that knowledge and that motivation that they have already within them. And it helps build that up throughout motivational interviewing. So at the end, they feel like, I've got this, I can do this, because they've just been acknowledging, not from somebody else necessarily pointing it out, but from somebody else asking them really good questions to realize on their own that they have the tools to make this change. So I love motivational interviewing, and I do feel it crosses over a little bit with gratitude, and it for sure crosses over with recovery.
Our time is up. We've been talking for over an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We did.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This is really fascinating and really deep work. And in the recovery, we're really looking for that radical change and shift, and how to support ourselves and the people that we're working with and the people we love in feeling like they can do it. And I love that, working with your strengths and really, what is it that bothers you? One thing that really stands out about what you said is, what is it that bothers me about that thing that I regret doing? And it's because it's out of alignment with my own values. And if I didn't have any values, I wouldn't care about that.
Right.
So I could be grateful I have values. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Is there anything kind of in closing that you'd like to wrap up with?
I don't know. I guess not really, but I guess what I'll say in closing is that I think that if we want to make a change in the world, what we need to do first is look at ourselves, and that's what I'm called to say in this moment.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been
Thank
a
you.
real pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Go to kilobicenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, for access to the interviews. You can watch them free online for 48 hours after they air, or you could purchase an all-access pass. kilobicenter.com.